Hello, my name is Tolg and I exist, therefore I think too much. I am going to be reading Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche and giving commentary, and in doing so I cuss. And if you don't like people cussing, you can go away, as I am not yet paid for anything, so... I left off on reading points 14 and 15. I'm still on chapter 1, and I go slowly because I talk too much. Chapter 1 is just Nietzsche going over the prejudices of philosophers, but as I understand it, it's just him being prejudiced against philosophers, which is fine. Most of what he says is true anyways. I like him. So it starts at 16. There are still harmless self-observers who believe that there are immediate certainties, for instance, I think, or as the super... Also, I am not doing well today at reading. I think ultimately I'm, in other regards, fine, but reading is not a strong suit of mine right now. So I apologize ahead of time. And I'll probably apologize again. For instance, I think, or as the superstition of Schopenhauer puts it, I will, as though cognition here got hold of its object purely and simply as the thing in itself, without any falsification taking place either on the part of the subject or the object. So the immediate certainty is that someone thinks at all, or that someone has any will at all? And that's a falsification according to harmless self-observers who have a belief? That's a negative connotation, which puts me in the disposition to understand, Nietzsche. Nietzsche believes and understands that some people don't think and don't have a will. What modern day would call an NPC. He also mentioned Kant. Brain is blanking out, but essentially cognition here got hold of its object purely and simply as the thing in itself. Kant speaks on a priori innate understanding, essentially prior coding of the person and what is innate in a person, their understanding of space, where my argument against Kant is that it isn't that we have these things pre-eminently understood. It is instead the only thing that we are predisposed to is the ability to observe. Without any falsification taking place either on the part of the subject or the object. I would repeat it, however, 100 times, that immediate certainty as well as absolute knowledge and the thing in itself involve a contradictio in adjecto. Contradiction in... I don't know what adjecto would be. I want to say adjective. Objectivity. I'm not sure. We really ought to free ourselves from the misleading significance of words. Amen, brother. I agree. The people on their part may think that cognition is knowing all about things, but the philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the process that is expressed in the sentence, I think, I find a whole series of daring assertions, the argumentative proof of which would be difficult, perhaps impossible. For instance, that it is I who think, that there must necessarily be something that thinks, that thinking is in activity and operation on the part of a being who is thought of as a cause, that there is an ego, and finally that it is already determined what is to be designated by thinking. Interesting. I feel like this is overthought. But ultimately, the part that I find really interesting I guess there are two parts in this that I find really interesting. The argument that there ought to be an ego at all, when the understanding from Freud, I believe, is that the ego is your survival mechanism. The evolutionary need to survive, and how, standing of humanity, where it stands with technology and all of that, has evolved us to a point of what we understand we need to survive now and at whatever time it's being considered. And then the next part that I think, that he would argue that it exists at all is interesting. I don't know if I already stated that. The next part that I find interesting is finally that it is already determined what it is to be designated by thinking. I'm not entirely sure what he initially meant by this, but or rather what that spurred in my thoughts was that more recently, I don't know if this came about during Nietzsche's time, but more recently there has been an understood difference in thought per the person being considered. So one person might think in literal words showing up in their mind. Some people think in, like myself, how I think is normally in an understanding. I think in feelings, in an understanding, and in visual. And so it takes a while for my brain to make those understandings words. Because, there are portions of words, but they're not all, it's just already in my brain. So it's not something that translates immediately externally. I have to put it through a filter of what the whole sentence is, the whole paragraph is. Otherwise, it's just an understanding of what is meant. And, everybody thinks in different ways is the intention behind that. And so, behind what I'm saying. And so what is to be designated by thinking? I'm not sure if he intends to mean what thinking in and of itself is understood as, or what is brought about from thinking. But yeah, that's where my brain's at and why I found it intriguing. That I know what thinking is. Oh, okay, I should have finished the sentence. Hee. So, it was, that the term thinking can be understood differently per the individual. For if I had not already decided within myself what it is, by what standard could I determine whether that which is just happening is not perhaps willing or feeling? Okay, I personally, and it may totally be different for other people, but my will to do something barely exists, but my will to do something is never thought out. In fact, I've had a lot of people argue me that I'm too impulsive, and I need more impulse control. So I can argue definitively that thinking is not the will to do something. And feeling, as a philosopher, it would be hard to argue a difference between thinking and feeling, because your whole job is to think everything through, to its nth degree, to its finite end. So even when you feel, you have to think what the feel is, what you're feeling, if it's a feeling. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think more people should be thinking through what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, what it means to be feeling that, what the significance of it is, all of that. However, I again would have to make a separation between the two, because to think out what you are feeling means that they are not one and the same. In short, the assertion, I think, assumes that I compare my state at the present moment with other states of myself which I know. I don't agree with that. That's specific to thinking about yourself. And yeah, you learn a lot by comparisons and contrast. But that doesn't mean that's the only way to learn. And it's not the only way to think about things. Sometimes I think about things and I do so pointlessly. Without comparison or contrast. Just... I have ADHD, so sometimes the thoughts are random and inexplicable. On account of this retrospective connection with further knowledge, it has, at any rate, no immediate certainty for me. Okay. In place of the immediate certainty in which the people may believe in the special case, the philosopher thus finds a series of metaphysical questions presented to him. A philosopher always would, wouldn't they? That's their fucking job. Veritable conscience questions of the intellect, to wit. From whence did I get the notion of thinking? Whoa. That's the exact question of how did life start? Big Bang? Out of a vacuum? Did it blink and just was there one day? That's... What would be the purpose of asking a question you will never get the answer to? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Why do I believe in cause and effect? Whoa, because that's physics. Is it a belief so much as it is an understanding? What gives me the right to speak of an ego? The right? Does anybody have a right to do anything so much as they do it anyways? The bumblebee can't fly, but still does. And even of an ego as cause. And cause of what? Everything. And finally, of an ego as cause of thought. Oh, I don't agree with that. I don't think that the human need to survive is the reason for thinking. Well, maybe. Okay, well then I raise the argument, is it the human need to survive? Or is it the human need to live? Because one could make their whole life about surviving, but in doing so, you live on the edge of a knife. It's too close for comfort to death. Ironically. And in living, a human needs to live in contrast to surviving. A human needs rest and a human needs comfort. And I think that is where thought is born from. A reprieve. Mental reprieve, contemplation of something before it is either acted on or participated in, whatever it is. But this provides a buffer to what is coming at somebody, handed to them externally. Thought is an internal action meant to help one organize and understand better. So I don't think that thought is born from an ego. But maybe thought is born from the need to live, and the need to live is born from the need to survive. But it is not. The need to live is not the need to survive. I don't know if I'm making much sense there. He who ventures to answer these metaphysical questions at once by an appeal to a sort of intuitive perception, like the person who says, I think and know that this at least is true, actual and certain, will encounter a smile and 2 notes of interrogation in a philosopher nowadays. Sir, the philosopher will perhaps give him to understand, it is improbable that you are not mistaken, but why should it be the truth? Side tangent story that no one needs, but I'm going to give anyways because I'm a horrible individual. I have lost all sense of self at least twice. And hippies call it ego death, modern day hippies, and pride themselves on it. And I don't think it's a sense of pride at all. It was rather fucking horrific. Being put in a position and being brainwashed out of everything that I was, whether that be by religion or otherwise. And then, just being fucking psychologically tortured into pure survival, and therein a destruction of self, left me with one thought, which was, do I exist? If everything that I know doesn't exist as I thought it did, am I even participating in reality? Is this a crafted reality to survive the reality I was going through? What actually is? The conclusion I came to, what I landed on to try to ground me, to try to provide a balance to build from, was, well, I am producing thought. It's like the pinch me, do I feel pain? Am I dreaming? I'm producing thought. That must mean that I have cognitive recognition enough to exist. So I am at the very least existing. I think, therefore, I am is exactly what that means to me. And someone provided the argument that that is not what that means to them. That being alive, participating in life is the ability to produce thought, which I guess is synonymous, but I didn't know so much if I was participating in life or if I was even alive, comatose type deal. So where philosophy is concerned and where this argument is what is thought, I didn't even get that far. It was just so much, am I breathing? Am I blinking? Is this an action of mine? Am I in a dream? And something else that happens with extreme trauma is the inability to decipher between being awake and being asleep. And that happens to me every now and again, far less now that, the environment I'm in is a lot healthier. But it every now and again is very difficult for me to discern if I'm awake or if I'm asleep. And more so when I'm asleep, how I'm able to understand is if I turn my head and the vision gets blurred because it's not capable of creating a scene. If I don't have the ability to control my actions, then I know that I'm dreaming. So all of this to say, very well, it could be the argument that's being proposed here is exactly that. How do you know you're alive? To which, my understanding was at the very least I have control over my thought. So, point 17. With regard to the superstitions of logicians, I shall never tire of emphasizing a small terse fact which is unwillingly recognized by these credulous minds, namely that a thought comes when it wishes, and not when I wish. Ooh, is he stuck in a dream? Huh. So that it is a perversion of the facts of the case to say that the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. That's interesting. Unless, this is in a position of not being able to understand the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind is the I, is the ego, producing the thought, and the conscious mind isn't capable of understanding where it is coming from, at which point Nietzsche is, right? This is Nietzsche? Yeah. Is lamenting the inability to control every single facet of his person, which, in prior points he's made has led me to believe that he has major control issues, and has the psychological need to conquer everything he comes by. Gotta be fucking miserable. But at least there's a goal to chase. So, good for him. One thinks, but that this one is precisely the famous old ego is, to put it mildly, only a supposition, an assertion, and assuredly not an immediate certainty. After all, one has even gone too far with this. One thinks, I need... And I don't think you'd be able to do this even through AI, but I would desperately love if I had a time machine, and what's that one movie where they go back in history and then get a bunch of people from history and bring them back to their high school and do Ted and somethings. I don't know. Anyways, I need Friedrich Nietzsche and Sigmund Freud in a room. With, who's that artist? Oh, the one who cut off his ear. I need them all in a room. Even the one contains an interpretation of the process and does not belong to the process itself. One infers here, according to the usual grammatical formula, to think is in activity. Every activity requires an agency that is active, consequently. He suffers with the ideation of God complex. Where is this born from? Do I have control over it? Is it controlling me? How did it come about? Maybe not God complex, but, the existence of inexistence beyond his own being controlled outside of his ability to control. He suffers existence. What do they call that? Suffering existentialism? It was pretty much on the same lines that the older atomism sought, besides the operating power, the material particle wherein it resides and out of which it operates, the atom. He has spun himself out on existentialism. More rigorous minds, however, learnt at last to get along without this earth residuum. And perhaps someday we shall accustom ourselves, even from the logician's point of view, to get along without the little one to which the worthy old ego has refined itself. Oh. Ooh. Okay. Stick Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, the painter who cut off his ear that I cannot remember the name of right now, and someone who is into coding. Binary code, into a room together. Have them duke it out for 48 hours. Obviously with food and water and respite, but still. Oh, if you could sit at a table with anyone dead or alive, who would it be? Alrighty, that was points 16 and 17 from Beyond Good and Evil. Huzzah! Have a good night. Take care of yourself. Do not get lost in the spiral of existentialism because it's really easy to do. Bye.